Well, that's an offensive title. Why Notre Dame doesn't bother you? I'm just going to freeform this. I've already written about it, but I figured I'd speak extemporaneously. Maybe get things out differently and perhaps even more clearly for some people. So, where to start? Let's start 3 years ago. In 15? In November of 2015, the Bataclan massacre happened. That was where a bunch of ISIS types came into a theater and shot up the theater. They actually hit like 4 or 5 different locations simultaneously with bombs and guns. They killed over 130 people, if memory serves. 137, including the terrorists themselves, who all died. It was a pretty big event. Shook the entire country, and you would think that if anything could get a nation riled up, and angry and hateful towards an attacker who wants to kill them, to convert and or kill them, to destroy their nation, that would be it. Acts of war regularly are smaller than that. Things that start wars are regularly smaller than that. How did France react to that? Well, the section that went viral was a reporter interviewing a Parisian man and his son. I say Parisian in scare quotes for reasons that most people on the right will recognize if they see the clip. Anyways, this guy and his son are being talked to by this reporter, and the son says, Daddy, we're going to have to move. And the dad says, no, Paris is our home. France is our home. The son says, but Daddy, there are bad guys here. And the father says, yes, but there are bad guys everywhere. And look, see all these people bringing flowers? And the son says, yeah, those will protect us from the guns. So it says, but flowers don't do anything. And the father persuades his son on television that these flowers will protect the son from guns. And this was spread around as if it was so heartwarming and uplifting, as if that was somehow encouraging, rather than possibly the most discouraging thing that you could happen. Here is an existential threat manifesting itself against the people with a beautiful history and culture and cuisine. And cuisine is the big argument for multiculturalism, isn't it? And here the French are getting destroyed and replaced with Somali cuisine, which is frankly not as good. And the people under attack are persuading their children that the best response is, hashtags and prayers and flowers. At some point, you just feel like Tyler Durden from Fight Club, who says, I want to put a bullet in the head of the panda that won't have sex to keep its own species alive. Screw that. And the absence of hatred and the greater revulsion to hatred than to the threat that is going to kill you and your family and your nation was what inspired me to write In Defense of Hatred. Fast forward a few years, we are in 2019, and one of the greatest cathedrals in the world goes up in flames. Now, officially, this was an accident, part of some renovation thing. I don't know a single person who actually believes that. France has had, around 800, 900 churches burned with arson just in 2018. The odds that the biggest cathedral, the biggest target for Islam, by extension, was just coincidental was just an accident, even though we have footage of people not wearing the appropriate construction attire walking around in the minutes and hours prior to that. I don't think so. I don't think anyone believes that any more than they believe what the British government has to say about the prevalence of rape gangs, thanks to what happened in Rotherham. Does anyone seriously believe that the French government is going to be more honest than the British government when ethnic and religious conflict is building? I don't think so. I think it's a self-delusional belief of the highest order. Notre Dame was burned intentionally. It was an arson. I will assert that, even if that is not the official story. That's my belief until further evidence comes forward anyways. And yet I don't care about it. Why? It was a beautiful building. I never had the privilege of visiting it, unfortunately, though I did see a lot of other beautiful cathedrals in Germany. A place, by the way, where many of the rape attacks happened in front of. In Cologne, for example, most of the molestations happened in front of a cathedral there. They like to do that. And I know what these classical European cathedrals look like. They almost defy belief, that people in that time could do all that work by hand, especially when, like me, you're in the construction trade and you know what goes into it with modern tools. You build a house or something and you see those masons or carpenters at work, and you're like, oh, that came out kind of like garbage, and you were using power tools. To imagine these people doing all this work by hand with chisels and mallets and rickety scaffolding, it's you develop an appreciation for it when you do that sort of work yourself. It becomes even more mind-blowing than just looking at it as an inexperienced layman has it. And perhaps as another digression, and by way of explaining this, I've talked a fair bit about Islam, but it's time to talk about Christianity for a bit. And one of the people I worked with in the construction world is a very strong Christian, and he loved to listen to Christian rap, Christian hip-hop. Bear with me. Christian hip-hop is about the cringiest music you can imagine. These are guys who, some of them pull it off better than others. I don't want to cast them all in one category, but as a category, as a genre of music, it just does not work. And the reason it doesn't work is the same reason that gangster rap does work as a genre, which is that the tone and the tempo, the sound of the music matches the content of the lyrics. When you listen to Eminem or Tupac, my two favorites, I'm a Tupac fan in particular, when you listen to these guys, or Biggie Smalls or Nas talk about, life on the street, and then rising past life in the street but never fully escaping it, like just the overall, the rhythm heavy, kind of not particularly musical, but definitely heart pumping, quality of the sound matches that content. When you listen to some of these Christian hip-hop artists who match the rapping skill and sound of these gangster characters, but they're talking about Jesus saving them, and lyrical theology was one of the taglines of one of the guys this guy listened to. Like, it's so jarring it just doesn't work. And you get the sense that it was never like it's so bad that that the artists can't not realize how bad it is, how jarring it is. Or they just, more likely, they just don't care. And I began to wonder, why would they do such violence to a musical genre like that? Violence in the loose sense, obviously. And of course, the answer to that is obvious because the artists themselves tell you why they are doing it. They are not writing this stuff to create good music. That's not the purpose. The purpose is to evangelize. The purpose is just to spread the word. And in fact, they get a little annoyed, if you focus too much on their musical skill and not on the message. They like it when you appreciate the quality of their talent, but only as a segue. So they can say, oh, you think this music is good. You should hear about this even better news. Have you heard the good news? It's all means to an end, not an end in itself. When you listen to Eminem Rap God, for example, that is just purely an exercise in rap and hip-hop skill and musicality, to the degree that hip-hop has musicality to it. With these Christian rap artists, there's always an ulterior motive, and that ulterior motive detracts from the purity and the consistency of the music as a work of art in its own right. And sometimes you almost wish you didn't speak English when you're listening to these Christian artists, because by themselves, they don't sound that bad. Some of them sound awful, but that's true of every genre and of every, musician of every belief system. They create good music, create bad music. But the sense that you're being directed towards a certain belief, and it takes away from the ability to enjoy the music. And in Christian hip hop, it's so ridiculous that you don't feel that kind of manipulated. But what if that method was done well? What if it was done through a medium that was not so jarring and not so just failing as Christian hip hop is, that you didn't notice, or that you didn't think about it that clearly, and it worked. Say, for instance, architecture. There's an idea. Say, a cathedral. Christian architecture is very interesting. And it's not just interesting because of the unbelievable heights of beauty it can achieve, which it does in artwork as well. Many statues and frescoes and paintings influenced by Christianity are some of the most extraordinary works of art out there. But Christianity doesn't just create beautiful things. Some of the ugliest, worst buildings out there are Christian churches. I was in a city a few weeks back, and there was this just absolutely great looking cathedral. Nothing as grand as what you'd see in Europe, but it was a beautiful looking cathedral that had a boxy, modern, just like Skid Row building attached to it, not adjacent to it, not separated by a back alley or anything, literally built together. This gorgeous work of stone with spires and everything, just glued onto this ugly postmodern piece of shit building. I was like, who comes up with this stuff? It's like taking, two beautiful, delicacies that don't go together and then putting them in a blender and serving it to someone. It's just such a waste, and such a strangely self-harming kind of waste. Like, do they not know what they're doing? And this goes back to the Christian hip-hop thing. I wonder if they do. I think that they do know what they're doing. They are Christian architects, strike me, increasingly, as the sorts of Buddhist monks who make beautiful mandalas out of colored sand and then sweep it away at the end of the day. Just as an exercise in contemplating the temporality of the world, the transience of the material world. Or who carve beautiful wax sculptures and then leave it out in the sun to melt. Both things that Buddhist monks actually do in Tibet, by the way. But they do it just for themselves. There's something publicly oriented about the Christian practice of architecture of this kind. And in doing so, there's something aggressive about it, too. Let me explain what I mean by that. When the Christian architect builds a cathedral, it is, as before stated, it's a means to an end. It is literally pointing upwards to God. It's not about the beauty of the building itself. And if you read Augustine's City of God, where Augustine addresses these pagans who are saying, well, maybe if we were not becoming Christians, we might have survived and not had our city sacked in the end of the 3rd century, beginning of the 4th, somewhere in that time. And Augustine doesn't say that the defense that many Christians like to say, which is that if only you had been more faithful, God would protect you. That's not what he says, and it's not the theological thing to say. What he says instead is that your old pagan gods would not have protected you, but for us Christians, the sacking of this city essentially doesn't matter. This is all, a veil of tears. This is all transient. This is not the real world, we might say, to get a little Platonic. This is a temporary place, a kind of purgatory, where you develop yourself in your relation to God, and where our treasure is the afterlife, and is our relation with God. And there's nothing these barbarians can do to take that away. Kind of admirable as an attitude. I'm not gonna lie there. There's something noble about that. But there's something manipulative about having that attitude and holding it, and yet also appealing to the attachments of other people to this world by building the most beautiful works of architecture imaginable, building these massive monuments to beauty manifest in stone and glass, and saying none of this matters. It's all about God. And that's where it becomes a kind of violence against the genre, where in music and the art in architecture and other kinds of art as well. It's a grand act of one-upsmanship designed to try to trump everything that everyone else has ever done and say, even my work doesn't matter. Obviously, by extension, that's saying everyone else's work doesn't matter as well. None of this matters. This whole genre and everything in it, whether it's architecture or music or the safety and security of your city, none of that ultimately matters. It's all about your relationship with God. And I think it's that morality that has distilled itself and separated itself from Christianity, but still has a Christian origin, that we saw in that Parisian father speaking to his son, saying, "They may have guns, but we have flowers." Is that different fundamentally from Augustine saying, more or less, they may have swords and torches, but we have the Holy Cross? They may have siege engines, but we have Jesus. We have our Lord and Savior. That won't stop those things. But of course, that's not the point. The point isn't to stop them. It's not to not stop them. The Christians will fight back. Hopefully, sometimes. One hopes that the pandas will sometimes have sex just to stay alive, because they are kind of cool. And we like them, even if they're not like us. But imagine a kind of panda that not only wouldn't have sex to save its own species, but also behaved in a particular way to get you to care about their survival. That was all about being as maximally cute as possible and getting you to just fall in love with the panda as a species, and then wouldn't fight to protect itself. At some point, when you see that relationship in the behavior of the panda, in the music that the panda creates, and the architecture that the panda creates, at some point, you say, well, that's fascinating, and it's truly skillful, and I just don't care. I just see what you're doing. I see what this is about. I can't care. I want to, but I just can't. I don't care about Notre Dame getting burned. I, frankly, care very little about any Christian art or architecture getting destroyed anymore. I used to care very deeply about it. My first reaction when I heard the news, was something like rage. Not like I was running around the house, banging on things, but the kind of slow simmering, that's what they did. Kind of feeling. It's a feeling you see in someone like Christopher Hitchens when the Taliban destroyed the Buddhas of Bamiyan. And they'll continue to do this. What ISIS tried to do to that library in Africa, which was this town I forget the name of, but the natives fought very hard with their wits, anyways, to keep that library safe. Ancient manuscripts that the servants of the prophet wanted to burn. Fortunately, they had the good sense to hide them away. And when French forces, it was the French who liberated that part of Africa, whose name still escapes me. They can go and fight for other people, but they won't fight for themselves. And when you look at the theology that informs the beauty in the architecture and the artwork, I find it impossible to feel sympathy, to feel sadness for what happens to people who claim not to care about what happens in this life, and who seem to treat every medium of communication as a chance to demonstrate how much more important what comes after is than what's here in the present. So, let me know your thoughts in the comments, and perhaps if you're a Christian, you know of some theological answers to this, because I am curious in that sort of thing. Perhaps you've read Augustine and have a better understanding of it than I do. or if maybe Augustine's not your cup of tea and you think there are better theologians out there. But that seems to be the teachings of Jesus as far as I can understand them as well. So let me know, and don't get too mad about what happens overseas.